Hello, everyone. Welcome to our snack program of the week. I'm Chris Hinrichs. I'm chair of the snack program committee, and I'm sitting in for Mary McCormick, who's on a well-deserved vacation this week. Rumor has it she's going to be spending quality grandma time, so we'll welcome her back next week for the changing of the guard. But welcome to the snack program offered by the Rotary Club of Milwaukee each Thursday noon. The snack is different than our regular Tuesday programs, as there's a little bit less to it in terms of time, but no less in terms of quality. It's a little less formal, no pledge, no invocation, no club business. It'll last about 30 minutes, but as I said, you can still count on some high quality programming and content. Typically, we feature a member of Rotary or a Rotary connected organization with ideas pertinent to how we are living today. And today, we are just so pleased to hear from Margaret Hoover, who is the host of Firing Line with Margaret Hoover on PBS. I think this is one of the advantages actually to our Zoom world, is that someone like Margaret is able to make the time from wherever she is to come and talk to us. Margaret will be interviewed by Bodan Zachary, who is Vice President and General Manager of Milwaukee PBS, and obviously, like all of us, a real fan of Margaret's. Just as an aside, we will be taking a 2-week break for snack programs for the July 4th holiday, kind of before and after. So join us at our next program on Thursday, July 16th, where we'll hear from member Lilith Fowler, who's going to update us on what's happening at the Harbor District. As always, you have the option of submitting questions as we go along, and Bodan and I will kind of keep an eye out for them and share them with Margaret as we go along. The program is intended to last a half hour, and Margaret has graciously agreed to stay around until about 12, in fact, until 12:40 to answer any sort of one-on-one questions after we cut the webinar portion off. So if you're interested after 12:30, stay on the Zoom call, and Michelle will switch us over to a chat function. So anyway, we're ready to go, and it's really my pleasure now to turn the program over to Bodan. Take it away.
Thank you, and welcome, fellow Rotarians. I am Bodan Zachary. I'm the Vice President and General Manager of Milwaukee PBS. I'm enormously proud of Firing Line with Margaret Hoover, which brings great conversations, much needed conversations to us on a weekly basis. Firing Line with Margaret Hoover enjoys perhaps some of its highest ratings in Milwaukee. That's a great thing. Before we turn to Margaret, let me tell you a little bit about her many, many credits. Margaret has served in the White House, in the Department of Homeland Security, on Capitol Hill, and on 2 presidential campaigns. She's a former CNN political commentator. Now I'm happy she's on PBS. She's president and founder of American Unity Fund, a political organization focused on achieving full freedom and equality for LGBT Americans by working with conservatives. She's the best-selling author of American Individualism, How a New Generation of Conservatives Can Save the Republican Party. She's also great-granddaughter of America's 31st president, Herbert Hoover. In pre-coronavirus days, she'd say she lives in New York City with her husband and their 2 children. She'll tell you a little bit more about where they are these days. Margaret's going to have two important programs that I'm encouraging you to watch. This Friday at 7:30 in her regular time slot, and the second special, which will air Tuesday night at 9:30. So in these two specials, Margaret is speaking to several conservative women who are changing the face of the Republican Party. She'll share her thoughts in documenting what motivated these women to run for office and the challenges they face as they participate in American democracy. Part one, airing again Friday at 7:30, focuses on rising stars. And part two of the special, airing next Tuesday at 9:30 p.m., focuses on the newcomers. So with that said, I'm delighted to welcome Margaret Hoover virtually to Milwaukee.
It is so nice. How's that? It's so, thank you, Bodan, for the very kind and generous introduction, and all of you for inviting me to join you. I was last in Milwaukee in November and had the chance to visit the station and see everybody in person. And at that time, we had very high hopes for being able to do something together during the convention, the DNC convention, which fortunately for you is still in Milwaukee. The Republicans of North Carolina have suffered a different fate in light of President Trump pulling the RNC convention, of course, from North Carolina and moving it to Florida. That too, I think, hangs in the balance given the state of, and this is not funny, COVID cases that are spiraling out of control in Florida. So we shall see how all of this develops, but it's a delight to be with you. And I'm also just very gratified to return to be with you and for your support of Firing Line, which is my passion project, my third child, I like to say. And so thank you very much for having me. I guess I'll start. You know, I have these new specials coming up that I'd be delighted to talk about. And I'm happy to also give a little bit of background. If anybody hasn't seen Firing Line yet, first of all, what are you doing on Friday night? You should be at home watching PBS. But I really invite you to check us out. You know, many of you probably know that Firing Line, it sounds a little bit familiar. You've probably heard of it. You may not know me, but you've probably heard of it. And the reason you've probably heard of it is because, of course, William F. Buckley Jr., who was one of the sort of leading lights, luminaries, and frankly, early television personalities in a political movement, hosted this program, Firing Line with William F. Buckley Jr., for 33 years on PBS. And it ran 33 years, which is the longest amount of time of any television show with a single host in history, in television history. Buckley beat Johnny Carson, if you can imagine. So the tradition is a long-running tradition of, and what it was, is what we attempt to do every week, which is a civil exchange of ideas from a range of perspectives in order to make ourselves all smarter and participate in one of the pillars of democracy that is critical, which is a free exchange of ideas. And every week we have people on who sometimes I agree with, sometimes I disagree with. I hear from all of you. Sometimes you agree with me, sometimes you don't. And I know I'm doing it right when I get it both ways. Because it means we're playing it down the center, we're being honest, I'm honest about the perspective that I come from. The host, or the guest, is completely transparent about where we're coming from, and we're both coming to the table to talk about ideas that are impacting all of us, whether it's public policy ideas, public discourse. The key underpinning of a free society is a free exchange of ideas, and that's a tradition we riff directly from William F. Buckley Jr. and from the original program. So much so that you will know if you watch the program. If you don't watch the program, another reason to tune in is that, you know, almost everything that William F. Buckley Jr. talked about in the 33 years he was on air resonates with our current political debates and the issues that continue to percolate and to drive the real challenges that we face as a society. And that had been true for the entire 2 years of Firing Line with Margaret Hoover. We had, for every single guest, for every single issue, for every episode that we created, we knew there was going to be a Buckley episode that would directly resonate and rhyme with the themes of that program until COVID-19. And it happened that for those of you who are astute watchers, you may have noticed that we stopped airing Buckley clips as soon as we went remote. And it wasn't because we went remote and we lost the technical ability. It was because actually in 33 years, from 1966 to 1999, there was not a pandemic or any kind of health crisis that Buckley engaged in and dealt with in a really meaningful way that created a direct parallel. And we tried. We looked at the AIDS pandemic. We looked at the AIDS outlet. But you know, one of the things that this program illustrates is how movements get issues right or wrong over time. And Buckley was a conservative, and you may not be surprised to learn he didn't discuss the AIDS epidemic, which really was a pandemic. So, you know, we've had some challenges in COVID in terms of being able to draw direct parallels to anything that had come in the previous 33 years. But frankly, if you notice, you know, if you turn on CNN, where I'm still a commentator, I was on CNN with Essie Cup yesterday, you know, most of the parallels that we're hearkening back to put this time into context is 1918, right? We haven't had something like this on this scale for 100 years. So I guess it's no surprise that we didn't have any direct Buckley shows to lift from. But the pandemic has changed everything. If you also watch closely, you know that I've been broadcasting Firing Line from my living room in Sag Harbor, New York. My husband and I have a very sweet little cottage outside of the city that we escape to on the weekends that has become our permanent residence as New York took over as the epicenter of the pandemic in the United States. And we're very, very grateful. It's small enough that I have to send my children and husband away on taping days because there's no way to keep a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old quiet in this small of a house for that long. And so, but it has been very nice to invite people into my home. I mean, that's my home. That's the backdrop. The bookshelf is, you know, those are all our books. There's behind my head, this is our working office, but behind my head on the regular set is a model of a ship that my father made for me and gave to my husband. And so it's a very sort of meaningful, intimate space. And it's been really, there's been this surprising degree of forgivability that the viewers have had. So much so that our ratings have actually increased 77% since the pandemic. And that's been very gratifying as well, because I think what we strive to do is engage in a civil contest of ideas, but also deliver good information to viewers. And I think at a time when people are home and want good information and need good information, they're turning to sources they trust. They trust PBS, and we're grateful that we have earned their trust, and they're turning to us to listen, to inform them, and for you to be informed during such an unusual and unprecedented moment. So I think I'm going to stop talking for a moment, and Bodan, let you kind of guide us through what would be most interesting to you and to the viewers.
So many interesting things I was preparing, but I wanted to ask, let's not forget about the specials we wanted to tell everybody about. Talk about the women, the Republican women that you profile, and you call the second one the Rising Stars. So talk about the two different specials.
All right, so thank you very much for this opportunity. So, you know, as we all know, the 2018 was the year of the woman. Right? It was the year of the woman because in that political cycle in 2018, more than 100 women were elected to the House of Representatives. Of course, Nancy Pelosi got the gavel back, became the second female speaker, or the first female speaker twice. I mean, I think she has 2 records there. And you know, if you follow this stuff as closely as I'm sure you do, and I do, we remember the visuals of all of the women in the House of Representatives during the State of the Union wearing white, as evoking suffrage and achieving yet another benchmark in parity. Of course, we're not towards parity, but we're moving closer towards it, and that was another benchmark. What nobody really knows, and has been given very little attention right now because of all the other things happening between the pandemic and also between the protests and activism surrounding the fallout of the murder of George Floyd, is that actually 2020 is a historic year for Republican women running for the House of Representatives. There have been about 226 Republican women who have filed to run for office for just House seats in the House of Representatives, federal office in the House of Representatives, which is about 80 people more than the highest watermark previously, which had been in the 2000s. So there is some history being made sort of underneath the surface, and it's a very unusual occurrence. You know, I think people think, nobody thinks of Donald Trump as really the, well, not nobody, some people do, but I don't actually think of Donald Trump as the person who's going to inspire hordes of Republican women to come run, but that's actually what's happened. And it's a really interesting, I think it says a lot of different things, which I'll get into, because I have some theories about why all this is. I've developed them. But anyway, one special we're going to be doing is about newcomer. It's called the Newcomer Special. That's the one that airs second. And it is 3 of these 226 women who are in contested seats, who are running. One of them is not running for the first time. She won last time, or she thought she won. She went to freshman orientation in Washington, D.C. Her name is Young Kim. She's a Korean woman, Korean-American woman, an immigrant from Orange County. And she was informed while she was in Washington doing freshman orientation with all those historic numbers of women that as the absentee ballots came in, she lost by a very, very thin margin. So she had to go back to Orange County, and she decided to run again. And the other 2, one is a Jewish American Republican woman from coal country in Pennsylvania. She now lives in Pennsylvania 7. Her name is Lisa Scheller, and she is a former opioid addict. One of the things she's done is well, she's clean, but she's also come clean about her story and her history. And one of the things she's done in the last decade of her life is create a series of coffee shops that employ recovering addicts. Because one of the things she realized on her road to recovery is that it's so hard to get your first break and to get your first job after you're clean, and then to set up a lifestyle that is going to continue to support the success of your healing. And so she has these coffee shops called Hope Coffee, and all of the people who are in them, it's a 501c3, it's a business, but it's also a foundation, and it employs recovering addicts in an area that has been very severely hit by the opioid crisis in this country. And then another one is somebody who's very close to you all. She's in Iowa. Her name is Ashley Hinson. She was a news broadcaster. She was actually the second violinist in the Des Moines Symphony before she became a newscaster. She's a journalist in eastern Iowa. She was a journalist for many, many years and ran for the Iowa State House of Representatives 4 years ago. She's now running for Congress. So it's a geologically diverse, geographically rather, not geologically, geographically diverse. My dad's a geologist. He would get a kick out of that. Geographically diverse from California, Iowa, and Pennsylvania group of women. And it just demonstrates, I think, the degree of diversity that you have of views and experiences of these women who are running for Congress this year. So sorry, Bodhi, for going on so long, but that's just one of the series. That's the first, that's the second one. Yeah. The other one is about women who are already in Congress, who are some you may or may not have ever heard of. You know, there's so many people in Congress, it's hard to know, who some of these Republican women are, and some of them are pretty remarkable. So one is Jamie Herrera Butler, who is the only Republican Hispanic woman in House of Representatives right now, and she's the only Hispanic woman to be elected from Washington State, actually, to serve at the federal level. She's a mom. She's 41 years old. She's got 3 children. She's had all of them while she's been in Congress. And she comes from a swing district. And so, she's very clear that she did not vote for Donald Trump 4 years ago. And, she has a very nuanced approach to the issues that I think you'll find as interesting and compelling as I did. As well as Elise Stefanik, who I profiled, Joni Ernst. Elise Stefanik was one of the youngest. She was actually the youngest woman ever elected to Congress at the time she was elected. A few years later, AOC beat her out. only by a matter of months, I think. And Joni Ernst, who is the first U.S. senator, female U.S. senator from Iowa, the first combat veteran, female combat veteran to be elected to the United States Senate. And then we revisit some of Liz Cheney's remarks to us from the firing line that we conducted with her about a year ago. She had some really relevant perspectives to this moment of women in Congress. So the Rising Stars is the first one that will air, and it will air next week. Next week? The 26th, right? Yes, it's going to air next. No, the 26th is tomorrow. Oh my gosh, where is my mind? It'll air tomorrow night, and I actually think you'll be pleasantly surprised by some of the illustrations you see of who some of these female leaders are on the Republican side of the aisle in Washington.
You spoke about your father and the model he made, and given your family's long lineage in politics, did you grow up, what were the dinner conversations like growing up? And when did you realize you were interested in politics?
Bojan, it's a great question. Thank you for asking me that. You're making me think for myself. I don't know that I can pinpoint a moment that I was interested in politics, but I'm going to think about it, because that would be really good to have an anecdote about the moment I was interested in politics. So the truth is, I've always been interested in politics. I've always been very patriotic. I've always had a huge amount of pride in the ideals of the Declaration of Independence and everything that our country aspires to be. And then had a desire to be part of that story in our generation, because I recognized early on, like all of us do when we study civics, to the extent that we study civics anymore. And that's, one of the challenges I think this next generation faces, that, this experiment that exists here in this country, which is some 240 years old, is one that will only continue if each generation furthers it. And you think through history, different generations who have been part of different struggles, different things have been asked of them based on the time in which they lived. But I've always just had a very strong desire to be part of the story of my generation and during my life, of continuing this experiment, because we didn't get anything. We didn't do anything or deserve anything to be born here. We just got really lucky. We are very, very, very lucky to be living in this country at this time. I feel that as a woman, for sure. And of course, there's so far to go, and for so many different groups of people. I know that. We all know that. That's been made painfully clear through the pandemic and through the protests and this racial reconciliation, which is so needed and is rising to the surface again in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, and have always just wanted to make it better since the time and be part of what can make it better since the time I was quite little. And I do think the family history has something to do with it. I think if my parents had been doctors, it might have taken me longer time to find my way to politics. But I don't think I would have been a doctor. I think I would have been doing exactly what I'm doing.
You spoke earlier about having guests on both sides of the aisle, as they say. And it's a fascinating group, because every week I get viewer emails saying, I can't believe she interviewed that person or this person. And it's always the opposing polar opposites. And yet you are so great in keeping a real civil conversation going. I mentioned to you recently that Sean Penn, as an example, who has been known to be incendiary and caustic, spoke to you for half an hour about being in the trenches, helping impoverished and disadvantaged populations be tested for COVID-19. And I forget the exact line you gave him. You allowed him an opportunity, if he wanted to get political. Do you remember that moment? And were you waiting for him to say something? And how did he react?
I did it a couple times, actually, and we only kept one of them in the show because he didn't take any of the bait. He took none of the bait. Thanks for asking me about that show. I really delighted in that show, because that program, if you didn't see it, it was Sean Penn was the guest. Of course, Sean Penn, the actor who everybody thinks of as, you know, a sort of a left-wing Hollywood. If you don't know much, you may think of him as just sort of your, you know, run-of-the-mill Hollywood left-wing, you know, activist type. And if you scratch the surface and you actually spend the time to really understand what he's doing right now, and then to understand his journey to get to this point, you recognize, I mean, this is a very serious person who's quite earnest and really wants to help. And he's gotten to the point where his organization has met this moment in a way that is actually, in my view and in my estimation, doing exactly what people who want to help should do. They're pairing their initiative, their individual initiative, and their ingenuity with leveraging it with government, local governments, particularly local and state governments, to figure out where the gaps are in terms of their delivery of services, and then filling them. And they're doing it with thousands of volunteers that they themselves are organizing and training to test for COVID. Right. So basically what Sean Penn did is he went to Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, said, hey, I have this organization. I'd love to be able to devote our resources toward COVID. How can I help? And Governor Newsom said, talk to the mayor of Los Angeles. So he went to Mayor Garcetti, and Mayor Garcetti said, you know, we're using our firemen and our emergency services folks to test people. And because they're testing people for COVID, they're not able to be out fighting fires and responding to other emergencies. Can we train you to initiate and to administer the testing? And they scaled up thousands and thousands, I would say first tens and then more than 100 testing sites all over Los Angeles. And they've completed, I mean, at the time that I interviewed him weeks ago, they had completed 250,000 tests. I'm sure they've done over 1 million by now, because it was 6 weeks ago. And so it's just, to me, it's very Hoover-esque, actually, and bear with me, but, you know, much of my inspiration for public service, of course, comes from my great-grandfather, Herbert Hoover, who, you know, was not a politician. And the only office he ever ran for and held was president. He became known internationally because he initiated international humanitarian food relief to Belgium in the middle of World War I, at the outbreak of World War I, when he wasn't in public service at all. He was a private citizen living in London who was uniquely positioned to help. And he recognized that and created the first international nonprofit organization that administered food relief to an entire country throughout the course of World War I. It was such an extraordinary feat. He was the only individual who was allowed to travel on both sides of the lines throughout the entire course of the war, even after the United States entered the war. And then that example continued throughout the rest of his life in terms of his volunteerism and just jumping into the fold and running towards the fire to try to help. I saw a lot of frankly, Herbert Hoover and Sean Penn, right? He just wants to help. And if you recall, there were New York Post covers from Katrina, if you remember when Katrina happened in 2006, of Sean Penn just initiating individual rescues in the 9th Ward. He just had a boat and a guy, and he was going around saving people from houses. I think that effort and his help, what I learned is that I think after that effort, he realized, you know, he didn't have to be the only guy out saving people, and he wanted to sort of formalize his inclination to help. And so he created a nonprofit, which was when Haiti happened, when the earthquake happened in Haiti, he then, you know, ran to the fire again. He took his operation to Haiti. He lived in Haiti for almost a year. He slept in the tents and the cots that his organization put up. And he was really intimately involved in trying to help Haitians really recover. I mean, recover and rebuild. And there's something really interesting happened. He started to work with the U.S. military. And he worked with the U.S. military, and he realized that the U.S. Army was one of the most effective actor on the ground in Haiti. And I think that was sort of where, in my view, and based on all the research I did, and that he recognized that he alone couldn't do as much as he as an organization. He as an organization couldn't do as much as he as an organization working in tandem with other organizations like the U.S. military, like local governments. And so he figured out these partnerships, you can leverage partnerships in order to do more good. And so, you see a real growth, I think, and an amazing trajectory of Sean Penn, which just didn't pass the sniff test for me. I mean, this is the guy who loved Hugo Chavez and loved Fidel Castro. And I did get to ask him a little bit about that, but it didn't really go anywhere. So maybe I'll have him back on the show and we'll see if he's rethought his politics.
Well, I want to ask you, one of the questions that has come in is, who's been your most difficult guest to interview?
Difficult. I don't know about difficult. I guess it depends how you define difficult. This exchange, allows for people to sort of say when we're together on the set in New York, if somebody says something and I think, hold on a sec, I want to sort of challenge that or sort of unpack that a little more. It's easier in person to do that. In this format, it's a little harder. I hear something, we say something, there's a delay. So interviewing generally is a little, the intimate, set that we have in New York is a little different during COVID. But difficult. I don't know who's been difficult. Ken Starr was a little difficult for me. That was one of the last ones we did on set in New York, you may recall. He was difficult because he's a deliberative person who's great at arguing and sort of like the willing assassin. And did I mention I'm a working mom? Ken Starr was a little difficult. Susan Rice, I will tell you, I just had Susan Rice on and she made news when she was on the program. She said that she would be willing to be considered to be Joe Biden's vice presidential pick. And that was news to me. It was news to everybody, but I was quite surprised because I'd always seen her more as a policy person. That she'd be willing to sort of jump into the political fray when she's been pretty clear in all of her writing and her books and her comments that she had made a choice not to do that earlier on. That was a surprise. And she's a tough interview because she's just she's a fierce, and I mean, you can't be as accomplished as she is without kind of being tough, but she's really tough.
So you so understand politics and in the world of conservatives and what you believe can and should happen with the Republican Party moving forward. Would you ever consider running for office?
It's interesting. I think there's a lot of ways to contribute. Oh, my daughter just let me know I was on mute, but I wasn't on. Thanks, Jules. I aspire to be of service in some way in the future, for sure. I really like that Nancy Pelosi, and you're going to understand this, Nancy Pelosi ran for office when her 5th child was in high school. And I just think there's many seasons of life, and I'm in one of them right now. I have this show that I love, and I have this 4-year-old that I love, and I think there's a time and a place for everything. And I think if I were to consider running ever, it would be in the future. It wouldn't be now. But it's something it's something I think about from time to time. I do think about how I'm going to serve. Somebody wise told me to think of life in terms of thirds: learning, earning, and serving. And they can be in thirds and however you want. It could be the first third of your life, the middle third of your life, and the last third of your life, or it could, be in any other combination. But, public service is something I definitely aspire to. And I just don't know how my life will unfold. So we'll see.
In the meantime, I just want to say thank you so much for what you're doing right now for not just the viewers of PBS and Milwaukee PBS, but for all of us who believe that civil discourse is critical, and you do it so well. So I appreciate very much your time to be with us here today. And I wish you well during these coming months. And I'm sure you're missing New York City at some level,
Yes.
or maybe not.
No, I am. It's, but what we miss about New York is not available to us. The restaurants, the culture, all of the things that New York offers, our friends, the vibrancy, the energy, all of that is gone now. And so what I hope for most is a real return to all of our cities, frankly, but certainly to New York. And a vaccine and therapeutics, so that we can all get our country and our economy up and going again.
Well, thank you again so much. I encourage all of you to watch Firing Line with Margaret Hoover tomorrow night at 7:30 p.m. Part 2 of her special on Tuesday night at 9:30 p.m. And that brings today's event to a close. Thank you, fellow Rotarians. Thank you, Margaret Hoover. We look forward to our next visit with you.